Well, look, they would have been prepping, I think. I spoke to someone actually on the prep team since yesterday afternoon. Um, and it sounds like, effectively they're going to go for continuity of a sort of the idea of serious, sober, leadership, sort of to contrast it massively with the sort of chaos of Johnson and Truss. But I actually do think, generally with PMQs, unless it was Corbyn, in which case your guess was as good as mine, it'd be something totally wild which has come up. You can predict what's going to come up. So, for instance, today I suspect, he could split it into do three questions on the economy and three on Braverman, which seems like a bruise they'll want to continue sort of to go after. But yeah, in terms of how you split it up, the way we do it is questions one and two. Normally, you would establish your position, establish the substance of your answer. Three and four would be where you'd pivot off the defensive onto the positive. So, you can't have a strong NHS without a strong economy. And then five and six would be the payoff. And I do think this is where having humour can really diffuse and help you win the situation. I know Sunak's not known for his humour, but think about times during the coalitions when we're on the ropes and there were huge stories about splits and divisions, and Cameron turned up to PMQs and said to Miliband, "Well, I mean, it's not like we're brothers or anything," and it brought the house down. So I do think he needs to have sort of one good payoff line, and it does make a big difference. I think Cameron's first PMQs against Blair, there was a great line of, I want to talk about the future. He was the future once. So yeah, does make a big difference. And for him, two audiences, obviously the public and the party, but I'd argue the party for him today is more important in terms of sort of shoring them up and unifying them.
Aisha, I should have carried a trigger warning for you there, mention of Ed Miliband getting rinsed by David Cameron over the dispatch box. But do you broadly agree with Giles that Keir Starmer's line of attack should be on the economy and Suella Braverman?
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that the sort of the kind of own goal of saying you're going to be governing with professionalism and integrity, and then bringing back Suella Braverman, and let's not forget the return to the fold of our favourite comedy character in British politics, Britain's answer to Frank Spencer, Gavin Williamson. So I think there's sort of plenty for Keir Starmer to go on there. Yes, of course, the economy, but I think what Starmer's team will want to do today is just kind of frame Rishi Sunak not as this new shiny kid on the block, but actually somebody who has been at the heart of a lot of the chaos of the last few years. I imagine they'll be making reference to that clip that got leaked during the leadership contest where he boasted about diverting resources away from poorer areas into sort of better off areas. They'll no doubt have an attack on him in terms of his lack of growth, taking away the universal credit uplift, breaking the manifesto, non-dom status. There is a lot for them to go on. And I think one of the things they're going to be keen to do is to say, look, it's great that you're here. You've broken lots of, glass ceilings, historic, brilliant. That's great. We completely celebrate that. But let's not kid ourselves. There's a lot of the same old same there. So that's how they, I think, will want to frame it.
And I think you could define, Aisha, Keir Starmer's performances against Liz Truss as solid without never really getting at a crack. She was very good, if at nothing else, at repeating herself and appearing impervious to any sort of attack line, even in the most humiliating circumstances.
I think we'd reclaim the very good. Yeah, I think her ability to be completely, richly, publicly humiliated. It was absolutely astonishing. But look, Keir Starmer is not a bit like. I think what's going to be interesting is that they're both quite matched in temperament. None of them are like massive showmen. They're not huge kind of show-offs. They don't really have the gift of the gab. They can deliver a very good serious speech. They're not brilliant at delivering the kind of funnies or the drama or the sort of oratory of Boris Johnson that's gone before them. So I think you're going to see two people actually quite evenly matched. I think there'll be, I imagine that, Rishi Sunak will want to sort of try and, he will have a good first outing, by the way. It's really important to note, if you look at the sweep of history of PMQs, whoever is the new Prime Minister, and there have been a lot of new Conservative Prime Ministers, he will have a very good PMQs because the commentators will be rooting for him, and of course his own side will be rooting for him. So they'll be cheering, they'll be waving the order papers. So I think Labour's team and Starmer's team will have to kind of factor that in. Liz Truss had a very good first Prime Minister's questions. Theresa May had an excellent first Prime Minister's questions where she channeled Margaret Thatcher and she sort of she kind of sneered at Jeremy Corbyn, remind you of anyone. She very much. So I think leaders get a really good bounce off their first PMQs, but it then gets more difficult.
Do you agree with that, Giles? Rishi Sunak likely to get a warm reception today?
Yeah, I think he will get a warm reception. I mean, look, let's face it, Starmer isn't that good in the chamber. For a barrister, he is incredibly flat-footed, isn't that agile on his feet. I do think Aisha's right, though. For Labour, it's a different calculation now. With Boris and Starmer, there was a very clear choice. Two very different politicians. Actually, they're quite similar. I do think two other things the Tories should do today. One is that Liam Byrne note still comes up in focus groups. Labour ran out of your money, so I suspect they'll want to resurrect that. And actually, class warfares, which they're getting the backbenchers to resurrect on Sunak and his wealth, actually, they can go after Starmer and his wealth. Because although people would argue there's huge differences, I know in focus groups outside of London, people talk about Starmer being a millionaire lawyer, so they want to sort of go after him in terms of sort of blunting that attack, and actually an attack which I think longer term won't work. Most people are aspirational in this country.
Personal attacks on Rishi Sunak and his wealth, Aisha, best avoided from the front bench today?
I don't think that's what they'll go on. I think Keir Starmer's savvier than that. I mean, look, if they do bring up the Liam Byrne note, I do agree that's got a lot of resonance. But I think after the absolute car crash mini budget as a rejoinder, so one of the tricks of PMQs is you anticipate the attack line that you're going to get, whether it's Liam Byrne's letter or whatever, and you prepare a kind of zinger to come back. So, that would be a very easy one for Labour to come back on. And I think, even the Labour side would all be sort of cheering that. In terms of wealth, I just can't see. I don't think Starmer is that sort of crass to do that. Where Sunak's wealth will come in is in terms of what he does. If he is taking money away from the poorest while he is this incredibly rich person, then that's when I think the Labour Party will make a thing. And of course, non-dom will be something that they could justifiably ask him a question about.
Well, plenty for both leaders to go on ahead of this historic session of PMQs we're rapidly approaching. Thanks very much to Giles Kenningham, former head of press for David Cameron, and Times Radio's very own Aisha Hazarika, former advisor to Ed Miliband and author of Punch and Judy Politics, an insider's guide to Prime Minister's questions. Coming up in the next hour, we're going to hear from Lord Blunkett on how to change the national curriculum. We'll do some more Guess Who clues, but of course, it is time for PMQs Unpacked with me and Tim Shipman. Don't go anywhere. Switch on YouTube. In mere seconds, we'll be heading to the House of Commons.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Hello, it's 12 o'clock. This is Patrick Maguire in for Matt Chorley until 1 p.m. It's time for PMQs Unpacked, but first let's get some headlines. The Chancellor has confirmed his so-called Halloween budget is going to be delayed. He was due to set out his fiscal statement on Monday, but Jeremy Hunt now says that won't happen until November the 17th because it's important to reach the right decisions. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak is preparing to face his first session of Prime Minister's questions. He'll face Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer in the Commons just 24 hours after entering number 10. He's already chaired a meeting of his new cabinet this morning, urging ministers to get to work and repay the trust of the British people. And the UK's most popular car is going to be axed. Ford says it'll stop making the Fiesta after more than 4 decades as it moves towards electric vehicles. In sport, meanwhile, England's 2020 Cricket World Cup hopes have been dealt a major blow. They've suffered a shock defeat by Ireland in the rain in Melbourne. More headlines for you in the next hour. You're listening to Patrick Maguire in for Matt Chorley on Times Radio. Now, of course, it's time for this.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio. Unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
Order, order. I call Patrick Maguire and Tim Shipman.
No expense spared with that one from the speaker. Tim Shipman,
beautifully edited
chief commentator of the Sunday Times, joins me in the studio. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well.
You looking forward to this one?
Well, I think it's always interesting to see them roll out for the first time as they sort of joust and try and find each other's weak points. And, it was interesting listening to that debate just now because Liz Truss was pretty impervious to any kind of attacks and Boris Johnson was able to laugh off a lot. Rishi Sunak has a little bit of a reputation as being slightly prickly. And for a guy who, thinks he's got a reputation to defend as being this sort of upstanding chap. He's already put himself on the back foot with this appointment of Suella Braverman, and I suspect this, I imagine he'll have some good lines lined up. I think Michael Gove and Oliver Dowden were in there about 5 minutes before dawn this morning, weren't they, coming up with jokes and gags and helping him prepare.
They've been doing this for a very long time, Oliver Dowden and Michael Gove, for several Tory leaders.
They've done it ever since Cameron, really, and every PM has had one or other, or both of them in at one point or another, I think. It's going to be interesting to see how he copes. If they start talking about his lack of growth, I wonder if people will start seeing that's a heightist
slur,
comment.
A vile heightist slur.
5'7", same as Macron. And
there you
Putin,
go.
Apparently.
Well, some grounds for international diplomacy there,
exactly.
I think. It'll be
looking eye to eye, they always say.
They can finally look into the whites of each other's eyes. It'll be interesting too, we had Aisha Hazarika on just then saying neither of them are great showmen, whether it'll be slightly a dialogue of the deaf almost, given that they're not completely at home as Commons performers.
No, that's true. But I would think both will want to show their own side, that they can land some blows, and that it's not just going to be a sort of university seminar in the higher reaches of policy. This is the one chance each week that you get to show that you can do the job. And Starmer will want to show, that I can still cause problems for this Prime Minister. And Rishi Sunak will want to convince the MPs that backed him and those that were a little bit doubtful that the right decision has been made to give him this job unopposed.
And has unity really broken out on the Tory benches? Are we likely to hear them really whooping and cheering today, at least for now?
I think they'll probably put their backs into it today, won't they? It'd be more interesting to see who's not whooping and cheering rather than who is. I imagine there'll be a cacophonous noise, and having appointed a chief whip who seems to at least understand which way up is, unlike Liz Truss, I would imagine that they'll have got people pretty organised, and they'll have people scattered across all the parts of the benches to make some noise. And at least shame everybody else into doing it too.
And we'll doubtless hear this in a few seconds. But as the man who revealed the full unsavoury details of the Suella Braverman affair over the weekend in the Sunday Times, it's a tricky one for Suella Braverman to defend. Trickier still, given the details you revealed in the paper over the weekend. Trickier still for Rishi Sunak, Mr. Integrity, Professionalism and Competence, to defend that appointment, as he'll surely be asked to do shortly, surely?
Well, as people in the building have said, that's politics. We were told he didn't offer jobs. It seems pretty clear that he did, in order to get Suella Braverman's nomination. And, when you want to be Prime Minister, you do what is necessary to achieve that, I guess. But I think it is certainly an appointment that when a guy stands up and talks about integrity and a couple of hours later puts someone who's been sacked for 2 breaches of the ministerial code only 6 days earlier in post, it's left a pretty sour taste in the mouths of a lot of Tory MPs, along, interestingly, with the appointment of Sir Gavin Williamson, who is the sort of backroom fixer. And he's got this slightly nebulous job at the Cabinet Office, and his best friend, Simon Hart, has been made Chief Whip, and a lot of people think, well, is Gavin really the Chief Whip? Is he just going to be telling Simon who to grab by the throat and who to throw against the wall? That's probably a little unfair on Simon Hart, who's been a perfectly distinguished cabinet minister on and off. But people don't like the Williamson influence.
Well, Ed Vaizey was saying yesterday that Simon Hart does not look like someone who could break your legs, but he does know who to call to break people's legs. And I think in the eyes of most Tory MPs, that'd be Gavin Williamson. Right, let's go to the Commons and hear Sir Keir Starmer's very first question to Rishi Sunak.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I welcome the Prime Minister. The first British Asian Prime Minister is a significant moment in our national story. And it's a reminder that for all the challenges we face as a country, Britain is a place where people of all races and all beliefs can fulfil their dreams. That's not true in every country, and many didn't think that they would live to see the day when it would be true here. It's part of what makes us all so proud to be British. Was his Home Secretary right to resign last week for a breach of security?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank the honourable gentleman for his kind and indeed generous welcome to the dispatch box. I look forward to Prime Minister's question time with him, and I know that we will have no doubt robust exchanges, but I hope that they can also be serious and grown up. So I look forward to it. Well, he asked about the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that. She raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government. And let me tell you, Mr. Speaker, what the Home Secretary will be focused on. She'll be focused on cracking down on criminals, on defending our borders, while the party opposite remains soft on crime and in favour of unlimited immigration.
Well, bit of a velvet glove iron fist from Keir Starmer there. A lot of magnanimity, responding to the historical import of the moment, Britain's first Asian Prime Minister of Asian descent, but then going straight for the jugular on Suella Braverman.
Yeah, I mean, interesting that Starmer did that, because one of his front benchers was sort of saying, well, he's not really a proper Asian because he's one of these terrible Tory Asians the other day. Wes Streeting gave a good response to that the other day, and now Starmer's followed it in. So that will try and, hopefully, from his point of view, deter other people in his party from making those kind of comments. But yeah, straight into Braverman. And, you know, she made an error of judgment and she's back and she's hugely experienced. Well, she's only done the job for 6 weeks. And Sunak there said that she brought it, she raised the matter. I think there are people who work for Liz Truss who say that that's not correct and that she didn't raise the matter. The matter was raised by Andrew Percy, whose assistant had been accidentally copied into this slightly bizarre email that Suella Braverman sent to another MP. He went to the Chief Whip, who went to the Cabinet Secretary, and the Cabinet Secretary raised it with the Prime Minister. I think the idea that the Home Secretary herself raised it is one that is at least questioned by others.
Questioned and, questionable and indeed questioned. I'm sure Keir Starmer will follow that up pretty rigorously. Let's go to his second question.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister stood on the steps of Downing Street and promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. But then, with his first act, he appointed a Home Secretary who was sacked by his predecessor a week ago for deliberately pinging around sensitive Home Office documents from her personal account. Far from soft on crime, I ran the Crown Prosecution Service for 5 years. I worked with Home Secretaries to take on terrorists and serious organised crime. And I know firsthand how important it is that we have a Home Secretary whose integrity and professionalism are beyond question. So, have officials raised concerns about his decision to appoint her?
Mr. Speaker, I just addressed the issue with the Home Secretary, but he talked about fighting crime. I would hope, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that he would welcome. I would hope that as we look forward, he would welcome the news today that there are over 15,000 new police officers on our streets. And the Home Secretary will be supporting them to tackle burglaries. While the party opposite will be backing the lunatic protesting fringe that are stopping working people going about their lives.
Yes, Starmer.
Is this entirely convincing, Tim Shipman, from Rishi Sunak? This sort of very red in tooth and claw sort of rhetoric, right? You know, it doesn't necessarily sound entirely in keeping with the mild-mannered accountant we've come to know, does it? You know, hearing him talk about lefty loonies and that sort of playbook.
It's a bit like Boris Johnson's scriptwriter who has been left in the building to a degree.
Exactly, that's what it sounds like. And it's a similar rhetorical technique, right? Keir Starmer is asking very forensic questions about the Suella Braverman affair. And in response, you're hearing why exactly Rishi Sunak wants Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, because he can say, well, look at how tough we are. We've got the toughest right-winger in the Conservative Party. Yeah,
that's right. And he, both of his answers have been pretty robust about borders and about burglaries and all that sort of kind of thing. And he's getting the cheers he wants from the people behind him. But he knows he's on a pretty sticky wicket here. And what's significant about that last bit? He didn't answer the question. Have officials raised concerns about it? I'd be very surprised if Rishi Sunak can say no to that question. If the Cabinet Secretary and others have not at least raised an eyebrow, I would be absolutely gobsmacked, to be perfectly honest. And Starmer's doing quite well so far, if we put aside the relentless use of the word secretary instead of secretary, which is already beginning to drive me mad.
You can take the boy out of Reigate, right? You can't. Not that Reigate is particularly, not that there's any Cockney Barrow boys in Reigate, but you know what I mean. It's an interesting contrast in styles here, and this is Rishi Sunak in attack mode. It's something we haven't really seen that much before. Whether the public are convinced is another question. So, just a reminder, if you're just joining us here on Times Radio, we paused the action to unpack the points being made by both leaders. We're just about to go to Keir Starmer's third question to Rishi Sunak.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I listened carefully. That was clearly not a no. We can all see what's happened here. He's so weak, he's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election. There's a new Tory at the top, but as always with them, party first, country second. Yesterday, on the steps of Downing Street, he also admitted what the whole country knows. The Tories have crashed the economy, and now somebody has to pay for their mess. I say it shouldn't be working people who've been hammered time and again by this lot, but those with the broadest shoulders must step up. Does he agree?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable gentleman talked about party first and country second. Perhaps he could explain to us why it was a few years ago he was supporting the member for Islington North. Mr. Speaker, my record is clear. When times are difficult in this country, I will always protect the most vulnerable. That is the values of our compassionate party. We did it in COVID and we will do that again.
Now, I think we're seeing the dividing lines that Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer will spend the next 2 years scrapping over here, aren't we? Or at least seeing the germ of the next Tory election campaign. Rishi Sunak talking relentlessly about protecting the most vulnerable in his earlier questions about delivery and public services. And Keir Starmer, as he told the Shadow Cabinet yesterday, trying to pin the recent weeks of chaos on Rishi Sunak, saying he's weak, he's a prisoner of his own party. And then, intriguingly, suggesting that Labour would be backing higher taxes on high earners, which is something we haven't heard from Keir Starmer before, is it?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. They've danced around that a little bit. And that is the kind of thing that will make the run-up to that, the new date for this budget much more interesting. And again, Sunak responding with a sort of Boris Johnson point about, well, you back Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer. So, I mean, it was popular on his benches. He got a big cheer for that. But again, it feels a little bit like Playbook 101 here from Sunak, who knows there's not a person who in Downing Street who doesn't know that this appointment is controversial, and there's the vast majority of them would have liked not to have felt they had to make it.
It feels like an exercise in Sunak gritting his teeth and just trying to get through this.
Exactly.
6 questions.
And the best form of defence is often attack, and Boris Johnson was pretty decent at doing that, and he seems to be following the same playbook today.
I have to say, remember, if you're listening, you can also watch along live on YouTube. If you're so perverse as to want to watch me and Tim do this in real time and see the action from the Commons, you're not particularly impressed, it has to say. Ross McCormick says, so culture wars meet for the people, Johnsonism 2.0. Plenty pathetic from Sunak, absolutely pathetic, says Matt. Not sure if that's Matt Shorley. Pete Blakemore, really what a waste of space this PM is. Boris reincarnated. Sunak, confident style, empty answers, says Mike Griffiths. Susan Hadnett, I'm no Tory, but I expected better from Sunak, disappointed. And Saragon McEnany, big flop Sunak. Pretty unanimous in your answers that Rishi Sunak is perhaps miscuing this. Perhaps because, Tim, this isn't the Rishi Sunak the public have came to know and love. They haven't seen a Rishi Sunak in partisan attack mode before.
No, I think that's right. They're used to him sort of doling out cash and trying to be the sort of the friendly church warden treasurer who's found enough money
to
pay for
the
Christmas decorations. But interestingly, my WhatsApp though is full of Tory MPs saying, "Well, this is a bit better, proper ding-dong, giving him what for. And a lot of the commentators seem to be sort of saying, that Sunak's doing all right. So, I mean, never let it be said that Westminster insiders get everything right, because quite often they don't.
I suppose if we're judging it on the basis that he needs to unify his party first off, given that Liz Truss has singularly failed to do so, he appears to be succeeding in that respect, doesn't he?
Yeah, and if you take the view that Starmer needs to land a killer blow that renders him speechless and looking defeated, he hasn't achieved that either. It is a good ding-dong. I think it's a fairly arid one, personally, but, we're seeing, as you say, I'm not sure this is setting out the full parameters of the next election. I think we're just testing each other in battle a little bit.
Testing each other's attack lines. Right. Question 4, Keir Starmer to Rishi Sunak.
Mr. Speaker, he says he'll protect the most vulnerable. Let's test that. The government currently allows very rich people to live here but register abroad for tax purposes. I don't need to explain to the Prime Minister how non-dom status works. He already knows all about that. It costs the Treasury £3.2 billion every year. Why doesn't he put his money where his mouth is and get rid of it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have been honest. We will have to take difficult decisions to restore economic stability and confidence. And my honourable friend, the Chancellor, will set that out in an autumn statement in just a few weeks. But what I can say, as we did during COVID, we will always protect the most vulnerable. We will do this in a fair way. But what I can say, I am glad, Mr. Speaker, that the party opposite, honourable gentleman, has finally realised that spending does need to be paid for. It is a novel concept for the party opposite. This government is going to restore economic stability, and we will do it in a fair and compassionate way.
Well, quite a lot to get through there. I have to say I'm slightly surprised that Keir Starmer went there so early in his joust with Rishi Sunak, talking about the Prime Minister not needing any explanation of non-dom status because, of course, of the revelations earlier this year about his wife, Akshata Murphy, previously having had that non-dom status. Are you surprised that Keir Starmer has gone so personal so quickly?
A little bit, but when you're sort of opening up to show your party how you plan to tackle this new fellow, I don't think it's a wholly unreasonable question to ask. But equally, it feels like one Rishi Sunak was expecting, and he's half put it on the table there, hasn't he? In terms of what he said about Jeremy Hunt. The interesting thing from the response there, and I think that was probably one exchange Sunak probably did win, was talking about, needing to pay for things. That was hugely popular, big cheer for that. Restoring economic stability, spending does need to be paid for. That is not an argument either of the previous two Prime Ministers could have made, because Boris Johnson wanted to spend incontinently, and Rishi Sunak tried to stop him, not always successfully, when he was his Chancellor. And Liz Truss, made a virtue of just whacking up borrowing and all the rest of it. So that does feel like a more traditional sort of standoff between the Tories and Labour, and that does show that Sunak can make a more traditional Conservative argument than we've heard for a little while against the Labour Party, and it'd be interesting to see how that breaks over the next year or two.
And it's a Conservative argument to which Labour don't really have a response yet, especially facing a leader who, unlike Liz Truss, has made so much of their sort of old school fiscal orthodoxy, right? Because the Labour Party hasn't yet decided what its answer to any of Rishi Sunak's big fiscal questions are. If you ask them, will they support, spending cuts or tax rises that he brings before the Commons, they can't answer. You say, where is the money going to come from your spending plans? They say, well, we'll abolish non-dom status. And then you ask, and then what? Then you get a lot of babble about green investment and not at all detailed prospectus that doesn't really add up. So he is punching a bruise that the Labour Party have left exposed there and aren't entirely sure how to cover yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has done a decent job of generally convincing the public that Labour will be more responsible than previous Labour leaderships have been. But because all the fuss has been about a government in disintegration for the last year, Labour haven't really been put on the spot. There's not been a great deal of scrutiny of that, and I think it will now be easier for people to turn their attention to that as a result of having Sunak there, because it will be a slightly different debate.
And Rishi Sunak is definitely the man on the Tory benches who can and will do that. Right, question number 5, Keir Starmer to Rishi Sunak.
I know he's been away for a few weeks, but he should have listened to what's been going on the last 2. But anyway, I have to say, I'm surprised he's still defending non-dom status. He pretends he's on the side of working people, but in private he says something very different. Over the summer, he was secretly recorded at a garden party in Tunbridge Wells, boasting to a group of Tory members that he personally moved money away from deprived areas to wealthy places instead. Rather than apologise or pretend that he meant something else, why doesn't he now do the right thing and undo the changes that he made to those funding formulas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the right honourable gentleman rarely leaves North London. But if he does, he will know that there are deprived areas in our rural communities, in our coastal communities, and across the south, and this government will relentlessly support them, because we are a government that will deliver for people across the United Kingdom. But Mr. Speaker, he mentioned the last few weeks. I am the first to admit that mistakes were made, and that's the reason I am standing here. But that is the difference between him and me. This summer, I was being honest about the difficulties that we were facing. But when he ran for leader, he promised his party he would borrow billions and billions of pounds. I told the truth for the good of the country. He told his party what it wanted to hear. Leadership is not selling fairy tales. It is confronting challenges, and that is the leadership the British people will get from this government.
Well, pretty bravura response from Rishi Sunak there.
He put crack cocaine on his Weetabix this morning, didn't he? He certainly practiced that in front of the mirror with some help, presumably, from Mr. Gove.
From Michael Gove, like Mickey from Rocky, geeing him up, I'm sure. It wasn't the easiest of questions for Rishi Sunak to respond to, because, again, those questions where your own words are thrown back at you. In this case, Rishi Sunak's pitch to a Tory garden party in Tunbridge Wells, where he boasted of having twiddled with the levelling up funding formula to make sure more cash, or rather less cash, went to deprived communities in the north and more went to constituencies like Tunbridge Wells in the leafy Tory shires. Tricky one for Rishi Sunak to respond to, reflects how many directions the Tory party and he's being pulled in, but he did manage to turn that back into a strong defence of his own principles and the principles that have ultimately got him into number 10, fiscal rectitude.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, to be fair, ever since that video broke, they have been trying to explain that he was talking about deprived areas of coastal regions, and that does Labour not understand there's poverty in rural areas? But he, clearly he was making a point that he was moving some stuff from Labour areas to Tory areas. Most of those deprived rural Tory seats are also Tory seats. So there was a party political point there, but, it's also a legitimate argument that he made, and that's the argument I'd have expected him to make. But again, he must have seen that question coming, a mile off, given that Labour have been very exercised about that video ever since it appeared.
Yes, they certainly have. And I think, I would say he probably won that exchange, wouldn't you?
I would say so.
Right. Final question. Let's see what Keir Starmer's peroration is. Let's see what the final attack line he tries to land is. And let's see what Rishi Sunak's big payoff is. Question number 6, the final in this exchange between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think everyone should watch the video and make their own minds up. In public, he claims he wants to level up the north, but then he boasts about trying to funnel vital investment away from deprived areas. He says one thing and does another. But they're shouting. They're not my words. They're not my words. They're the words of the former chair of the Tory party, sacked yesterday for telling the truth about the Prime Minister. Even his own side know he's not on the side of working people. That's why the only time he ran in a competitive election, he got trounced by the former Prime Minister, who herself got beaten by a lettuce. So why doesn't he put it to the test, let working people have their say and call a general election?
Well, it'll take a long time to get through this paper if we carry on like this, Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about mandates, about votes, about elections. It's a bit rich coming from the person who tried to overturn the biggest democratic vote in our country's history. Our mandate is based on a manifesto that we were elected on to remind him an election that we won and they lost. A mandate that says we want a stronger NHS, better schools, safer streets, control of our borders and levelling up. That is the mandate that I and this government will deliver for the British people.
Well, that was pretty strong stuff from both sides, wasn't it? And also, again, we're getting the attack lines. Both sides want to land.
And guess what, Patrick?
Here.
We're enjoying them today, but when we've heard them for 50 times next week, we'll be wondering.
No, we won't want to hear, Rishi Sunak third in the order of precedence to a lettuce. The continuity Jeremy Corbyn, who tried to overturn Brexit. We're getting a sense of what they think is going to stick on both sides, aren't we?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It was one would have expected to hear about the lettuce this week, and I guess you're going to get Sunak trying to support with the ERG by cheerleading on Brexit. I've been watching the people on the front bench around him. It's quite interesting. Kemi Badenoch, who's sitting next to Sunak, greatly enjoying herself, nodding along, really getting into it. Penny Mordaunt, a couple of seats along the other way, looks very wan. Not really.
As you'd expect from someone who isn't Foreign Secretary.
Not Foreign Secretary. Not didn't play her cards as well as Suella Braverman did. Penny Mordaunt sat there with a pair of aces and ended up losing the hand, whereas dear old Suella has pulled Jack 9 to an inside straight, hasn't she? But it's interesting. I mean, as a contest, I think Starmer started pretty well, but there's a slight whiff of Liverpool in Istanbul there. Sunak hit 3 firm goals back at the end there, I think, and at very worst that was a 3-3 draw. And I think, given what might have been expected to happen, the Tory benches will go away pretty euphoric about that.
All comes down to who Jersey Dudek in this political footballing metaphor is. I think so. In summary, I think we can say Labour wants to say Rishi Sunak is too wealthy to understand the problems the public have and is also a prisoner of a chaotic party, despite pitching himself as Mr. Stability. And all the attack lines Boris Johnson threw at Keir Starmer still stand from Rishi Sunak, that he's Mr. Islington, that he himself is weak, that he's a prisoner of the Corbynites and he wants to overturn Brexit.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm just looking down, just to take a few tweets that are going on at the same time. Ava Santina from Politics Joe says Sunak is a catastrophe for Labour. I think it's probably a bit strong. But Sonia Sodder on the other side, a commentator for The Observer, says Sunak very continuity. Johnson trusts in his approach to PMQs, shores up the idea that not much has changed, really. Dan Hodges from the Mail on Sunday also suggesting Labour MPs ought to be concerned Rishi Sunak was ready for Keir Starmer on every question. Well, I think he probably would have been in the first outing. It's going to be interesting to see how he deals with Starmer on some of the specifics. Sunak's supposed to be a details man, but today we got Sunak, the big picture wielder of the cricket bat, while Starmer tried some forensic stuff and didn't get very far. But, often it's what's not said. I think people will look at that non-answer on whether officials were concerned about the Braverman appointment. And if I was a daily journalist, I'd be going away to
that will be dogging them for the rest of the week, I expect. I have to say, I think we both agree with Pete Blakemore on the YouTube channel, who says this should now be renamed Prime Minister's Soundbite, no questions and no answers. Nothing new in the world there. Right, after the news, we'll bring you the best of the rest, the other exchanges. Tim Shipman is going to stay with me and stay with us on the YouTube channel and here on Times Radio. But first, the headlines from Cara Bentley.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thanks, Patrick. Good afternoon. In Rishi Sunak's first Prime Minister's questions, Sir Keir Starmer has labelled the Prime Minister weak for rehiring Suella Braverman to run the Home Office less than a week after she was sacked.
She's done a grubby deal, trading national security because he was scared to lose another leadership election. There's a new Tory at the top, but as always with them, party first, country second.
Suella Braverman sent an email from a personal email address breaking the ministerial code. The Prime Minister said it had been acknowledged and they'd moved on.
The Home Secretary made an error of judgment, but she recognised that, she raised the matter and she accepted her mistake. And that's why I was delighted to welcome back into a united cabinet that brings experience and stability to the heart of government.
The Chancellor has said the government's economic statement will be delayed by 2 weeks to the 17th of November. It will now be a full autumn statement with an independent economic forecast. Jeremy Hunt said this would serve the government's priority, economic stability.
This is my recommendation to the Prime Minister as the best way to ensure that the decisions that we take, these very, very difficult decisions, are ones that stand the test of time and give us the best chance of giving people security over their mortgages, over their jobs, over the cost of living concerns that everyone has.
The UK's most popular car is going to be axed. Ford says it will stop making the Fiesta after more than 4 decades as it moves towards electric vehicles. The furniture retailer Made.com has stopped taking orders after talks to find a buyer failed. Shares in the company fell by 93% yesterday. Unsettled and very mild, sometimes wet and windy in the west. Toby Gillis has the sport.
England's cricketers have been beaten by Ireland at the T20 World Cup, going down by 5 wickets in a rain-reduced match. Watching was TalkSport's cricket editor John Norman.
England will rue the rain, which came with 5.3 overs left in the match, but only have themselves to blame for a defeat that means they face a battle to make the semi-final stages. Poor with the ball, and Ireland took advantage. 10 overs in, Ireland at 92 for 1, only to suffer a collapse, bowled out for 157. England's chase, though, got off badly, losing Butler's second ball, and they were 29 for 3 when Stokes was out. With the bad weather approaching, England never got ahead of the DLS target, meaning a surprise defeat and a huge match against Australia at the same ground on Friday.
The Foreign Secretary has been criticised for suggesting that LGBTQ+ football fans heading to the World Cup in Qatar should be respectful of the host nation. James Cleverly's comments follow the arrest of gay rights campaigner Peter Tatchell, who was detained in the country for staging the first ever LGBTQ+ protest there. Mr. Tatchell says the Foreign Secretary should be highlighting the abuses being carried out by the regime instead. Could Novak Djokovic be allowed to play in next year's Australian Open? The 21 times Grand Slam champion, who's unvaccinated against COVID-19, was deported from Australia in the lead-up to this year's tournament on health and good order grounds. He says there are positive signs that his 3-year ban on entering Australia will be waived, as Times Radio's Nick Ellaby explains.
The former world number one, who's won a record 9 Australian Open men's singles titles, said he was hoping to hear soon whether his bid to have his 3-year visa ban set aside by the government had been successful. There are suggestions the new administration is willing to overturn it, and speaking to a Serbian media outlet, Djokovic said, "I just want to play tennis." The Australian Open tournament director, Craig Tilley, said earlier this month Djokovic would be welcome in January if he could get a visa, but he says Tennis Australia would be unable to lobby on his behalf. Meanwhile, former Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews has said to waive Djokovic's ban would be a slap in the face for Australians who did get vaccinated.
Chelsea have appointed world-class football leader Lawrence Stewart as technical director. Stewart, whose task will be to focus on football globally, will take up his duties after completing his commitments with French club Monaco, where he's been working in a similar role since June 2020. And Rangers have revealed plans for a statue of Walter Smith at Ibrox, announcing the news on the first anniversary of their former manager's death. Smith won 10 league titles and 11 domestic cups over 2 spells at the Glasgow club. He died
Mastercard's Strive UK programme, connecting micro and small business owners with the right digital tools and support to help them manage the rising cost of living. Find out more at mastercard.co.uk/strive.
Yes, Patrick Maguire here on Times Radio until 1 p.m. in association with Mastercard's Strive UK programme, empowering small businesses to grow and thrive in the digital economy. Find out more at mastercard.co.uk/strive. Tim Shipman is still here in the studio with me for PMQs Unpacked. We've just watched what I think we both agreed was a score draw between Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer. Remember, you can always tune in and watch us live on the Times Radio YouTube channel as well. Having done those 6 questions between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, let's have a look at the best of the rest. And as is our constitutional duty, sorry to disappoint you, everybody. We're going to go to Ian Blackford, who asked about benefits.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I congratulate the new Prime Minister on becoming the first British Asian to hold the office. The significance and the symbolism of this achievement is to be warmly welcomed by everyone. Mr. Speaker, yesterday on the steps of Downing Street, the new Prime Minister promised to bring, and I quote, compassion to the challenges that we face today. So, on his first full day in the job, let's put that to the test. A winter of uncertainty is coming, and next April will see a cliff edge moment. Millions face a double whammy as the energy price guarantee is cut off, while households are hit by austerity 2.0 and a real terms cut to social security benefits that many rely on to survive. If people are actually to trust the new Prime Minister's words about compassion, will he today reassure people and guarantee that benefits will rise in line with inflation in his upcoming budget?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the right honourable gentleman for his, again, kind remarks. And what I can tell him is my record on this is clear. Through the difficult times that we faced in this country through COVID, I always acted in a way to protect the most vulnerable. That's because it is the right thing to do, and those are the values of our compassionate party. And I can absolutely reassure him and give him that commitment that we will continue to act like that in the weeks ahead.
Interesting question for me in Blackford, because if you remember a million years ago, just over a fortnight ago at Conservative Party conference, this was the big row of the conference. Was Liz Truss going to raise benefits in line with inflation about 11% or in line with average wages 5%? And Rishi Sunak hasn't quite answered in the way that Ian Blackford wants him to and committed to raising them in line with inflation. But given that his Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, was one of the voices leading that rebellion, Rishi Sunak is using words like compassion. Can we see where this one's going, Tim?
Yeah, I think Mr. Blackford would probably go away relatively happy with that answer. He didn't say, I'm not going to write my budget today. That's kind of what he meant. But it's pretty clear, I would have thought, what the direction of travel is. And if it isn't, it's a clever answer to make us think that it is.
To make us think that... and it also allows... It's the sort of language that will allow him probably, should he want to split the difference between 11% and 5% and find a middle ground that allows him to say, well, we're compassionate without boxing himself in and committing to follow inflation, no matter how high it goes over the coming weeks and years and months.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, these are very tricky financial decisions, and every move of 0.5% in inflation is liable to cost sizable sums of money. So he would not want to commit several weeks out from doing that. But yeah, it was a fairly sober answer, and there wasn't too much jeering. I think people can see that he would like to do it, but whether or not he does, we'll find out on the 17th of November.
Right, another sticky wicket for the Prime Minister next. The delivery came from Caroline Lucas, the Green Party MP. She asked about fracking.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's reckless predecessor took a wrecking ball to nature, prompting millions of members of the RSPB, the National Trust and the Wildlife Trust to rise up in opposition. Yesterday, he promised to fix her mistakes, as well as to uphold the party's 2019 manifesto. So if he is a man of his word, will he start by reversing the green light she gave to fracking, since it's categorically not been shown to be safe, and instead maintain the moratorium that was pledged in that very manifesto that he has promised to uphold?
Well, I've already said I stand by the manifesto on that. But what I would say is that I'm proud that this government has passed the landmark Environment Act, putting more protection for the natural environment than we've ever had, with a clear plan to deliver. And I can give the Honourable Lady my commitment that we will deliver on all those ambitions. We will deliver on what we said at COP, because we care deeply about passing our children an environment in better state than we found it ourselves.
Bit of balm for a party wounded by last week's row over fracking, Tim.
Yeah, I think he sort of, when he said I was sticking to the manifesto, whether there's a big row on the Tory benches about that, we'll see. But also, you know, a Tory tried to reassert green credentials again. Boris Johnson did a fair bit of that, to give him some credit, particularly around the COP summit and some of that stuff. And Liz Truss was desperate to unpick it. It sounds like Rishi Sunak is edging back towards the Johnson position there.
Because Liz Truss gave the impression, very deliberately, that she was prepared to junk all of that in pursuit of growth.
Correct.
You know, be that fracking or the moratorium on new North Sea oil and gas exploration. And as you say, Rishi Sunak is going back in the opposite direction.
Yeah, and that makes it harder for you know, the Green Party and bits of the Labour Party to attack him on that stuff. But you know, it's not always hugely popular with his own benches. But I think people will see that as a bit of the sort of old Linton Crosby strategy of barnacles off the boat. Don't pick fights that you don't necessarily need to have. Focus on what matters. And I think we're going to see from Sunak mostly a focus on the economy for the time being. And you know, they'll want to get Britain out of the woods before they start picking a whole bunch of fights on other things that they're not necessarily going to win.
Well, it's been a week of unlikely comebacks in British politics. Here's another. Wendy Morton, once upon a time Liz Truss's chief whip, asking a question from the backbenches on new homes and the green belt.
Mr. Speaker, in my Aldridge Brown Hills constituency, we're at risk of 8,000 new homes being dumped in the constituency. Will my right honourable friend use the opportunity of this Prime Minister's question to reaffirm the government's commitment to protecting the green belt and to adopting a really rigorous brownfield first policy?
Well, can I say thank you to my honourable friend for her question, and I can give her that assurance. She's absolutely right. We must protect our green belt, and we are adopting a brownfield first strategy. I'm pleased we had a record number of new homes built in the last year, but it's important that we build those homes in the right places.
Well, that was a not unaggressive attack on Rishi Sunak, or at least a not entirely friendly question from Wendy Morton, Liz Truss's chief whip, one of the recent departures from government, with a test for Rishi Sunak. During his leadership campaign, he pledged to make it harder to build on the green belt. And that was very much a warning shot from someone who's not particularly well disposed to him, was it?
No. I mean, the risk of being the facetious one, he would be more concerned if she'd shown herself to be a chief whip who could organise another group of MPs to agree with her, which was not very in evidence when she was chief whip. But yes, it is a running sore on Conservative benches. People who want economic growth and development, desperate to allow planning deregulation, and a heck of a lot of Conservative MPs do not. And it's always a difficult one. There are rules in these economic zones that Liz Truss produced, which are sort of a souped-up version of what Sunak himself backed in free ports, where you could see quite drastic liberalisation of the planning rules. Be very interesting to see to what degree the Sunak government sticks with any of that. Again, if his goal is unity, he'll be slow playing all that for a little while, and it's an interesting shot across his bows.
Particularly with Michael Gove back in the housing department, and he is, quite keen to get something done on this. I think he appreciates that this is part of the Gordian knot that Conservatives have to untie, at least before the next election, if they want to solve economic problems and electoral ones too.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, the Tories strongly believe that home ownership is something that makes you conservative. And they also have a heck of a lot of voters who have children who can't afford to buy homes. So solving housing is one of the bigger problems and the more important problems to solve. Unfortunately, it's also one of the most intractable. It's kind of one of those third rail issues that tends to electrocute anyone who tries to touch it. And Wendy Morton just sort of suggesting she might have a taser to hand.
Well, let's see if she knows how to use it on the basis of the past week's evidence and her short, unhappy career as Chief Whip. I wouldn't necessarily back her not to fire it at herself inadvertently. Tim Shipman, chief political commentator at the Sunday Times, thanks very much for joining us for another session of PMQs Unpacked. Remember, you can watch that every week on YouTube, tune on here on Times Radio, and you can get that later with all the key exchanges from Keir Starmer, Rishi Sunak and the rest of the House on the Times Red Box podcast. Just look that up wherever you get your podcasts from. Right, we're hurtling towards the end of the show, but we do have time for our final Guess Who clue. Nobody's joining Matt Chorley's cabinet today, and Rishi Sunak has already filled his, so in his absence, we're not playing his hugely popular quiz, playing a game of Guess Who. 5 clues over 3 hours, 1 mystery politician. You've already had 4 this morning. You've had their fellow of All Souls, Oxford, that prestigious postgraduate Oxford College. You know that they were beaten by Harriet Harman in an election. You know that they were knighted in 2019. You know that they